You won't believe what happened next. Imagine the perfectly ordinary evening, the kind of mundane, comforting routine that kills passion and breeds contempt. Dinner was over, the plates were cleared, and the quiet hum of the dishwasher filled the upscale suburban home. Sarah, 35, stunning in the way women who dedicate themselves to subtle, high-end maintenance are, sat on the plush sofa, a cashmere throw draped over her legs. Her husband, Mark, 40, a successful financial analyst whose life was a series of meticulously planned spreadsheets, was engrossed in a late market report on his tablet. They were physically close, yet universes apart. Their marriage wasn't failing dramatically. It was just fading, a slow, quiet death by 1,000 unsaid words. But tonight, one word, a single, carelessly placed pronoun and an intimate verb, was about to rip through the delicate facade of their life like a sonic boom. Everything was about to change. The comfortable silence was a lie, and the truth was contained in a 2-second vibration and a glowing screen. Sarah's phone lay face up on the coffee table. She reached for it, her movements practiced, almost bored. Mark was sighing softly, rubbing his temples, a clear sign the market was being uncooperative. This was her window. She unlocked her phone, her thumb hovering over the familiar chat icon. Not her husband's thread, not their dull, factual, "Did you remember to book the plumber?" thread. She navigated to his chat, Liam's chat. Liam, the architect, the adventure, the brilliant, reckless mistake she had thrown herself into 6 months ago. The man who made her feel seen, vital, and dangerously alive. She had meant to text him a simple, loaded phrase. A promise whispered across the miles of their deception. A phrase that summarized the hollow ache she felt every night, even when her husband was just feet away. Her fingers flew across the glass, driven by a sudden, intense wave of longing. "I miss you." She didn't hesitate, didn't review it, the emotion too raw to second guess. She pressed send, the message delivered instantly. She laid the phone back down, a small, secret smile playing on her lips, the kind of smile that belongs only to the profoundly guilty. A fraction of a second later, the atmosphere in the room crystallized. Mark lowered his tablet, not violently, but with a deliberate slowness that was infinitely more chilling. His eyes, usually softened by the slight fatigue of overwork, were now sharp, laser-focused not on his screen, but on his phone, which had just vibrated on the armrest next to him. Sarah's breath hitched. Wait, his phone? She watched, frozen, as he picked it up. His face, trained to be impassive in the high-stakes world of finance, was utterly unreadable. He opened the message, his thumb scrolled slightly, confirming the sender. The light from the screen cast a pale, incriminating glow on his face. The silence returned, now thick, suffocating, and absolute. It was the sound of a universe collapsing. He looked up, meeting her eyes over the rim of the phone. There was no anger, no panic, only a terrifying, quiet comprehension. "Sarah," he said, his voice flat, devoid of all color. "Did you mean to send this to me?" He didn't ask what it meant. The text itself was clear. The sender, his wife. The recipient, him. The content, "I miss you." A simple, tender message that they hadn't exchanged in years, now appearing unsolicited, minutes after she had settled down for the evening with him. It was a message that didn't fit, a puzzle piece from another life. The world tilted. Sarah's mind, usually so controlled, went into a dizzying spiral of panic and desperate calculation. She saw her entire life, the house, the car, the savings, the carefully constructed respectability flashing before her eyes, poised on the edge of a precipice. She knew, instantly and with horrifying certainty, that any hesitation, any stammered apology, any declaration of love for him now would be completely unbelievable. He wasn't stupid. His work demanded a relentless pursuit of truth and pattern recognition. The message was simply too out of place. Her affair, their secret world, was one misplaced keystroke away from catastrophic exposure. The only way out was forward, into an equally brazen, utterly fabricated lie. It had to be immediate, utterly convincing, and emotionally bulletproof. A different name. She needed a different name. A name that warranted spontaneous, tender missives. A name that would explain the intensity without triggering suspicion of infidelity. A family name, a name that Mark couldn't possibly argue with. Mother. Her mother. A woman Mark respected, a woman Sarah loved fiercely, and a woman who was currently 200 miles away. It was a perfect, desperate, beautiful lie. She forced herself to breathe, the oxygen burning in her lungs. She had to sell it. Now. Oh my God, she said, letting out a small, high-pitched laugh, a slightly hysterical sound that sounded just plausible enough. She snatched her phone back, pretending to check her own sent messages with frantic, exaggerated movements. Mark, thank God, I was just texting my mother. She frowned, feigning confusion. What? What did you think I sent you? She kept the denial light, almost playful, casting him as the one who was being ridiculous. Seriously, I was telling her about the trip we're planning. She just called me earlier rambling about, oh, wait a second. She peered dramatically at his screen, leaning in close, her hair brushing his cheek, a carefully chosen intimate gesture to deflect. She pointed at the screen, her voice shifting to one of sudden, manufactured realization. Oh, my dear God. No. I was sending it to Mom. She looked up at him, her eyes wide, glistening just a little. I miss her, Mark, Sarah continued, letting the forced smile dissolve into a look of genuine, heartfelt longing. It wasn't hard to tap into real emotion. She did miss her mother. She injected a slight tremble into her voice, transforming the text from a lover's whisper into a daughter's lament. I was sending it to Mom. I think I hit your name by mistake. You're right there at the top of my contacts. Oh, that's mortifying. She gave another nervous short laugh. I was just thinking about how long it's been since I saw her. I'm worried about her, being all alone. She let her hand rest lightly on his arm, a gesture of shared worry, not guilt. I'm sorry. I really must have been distracted. I meant to write, I miss you, Mom. You know how she can be a bit fragile lately. Thank God it was only you and not, I don't know, my boss. She delivered the last line with a hearty, relieved chuckle, hoping to lighten the mood and close the subject before he had a chance to process the sheer audacity of the deflection. The lie was out. It was flimsy, but it had speed and plausible sentimentality on its side. Now, she just had to watch him carefully, waiting for the devastating counterpunch. Mark held the phone, his gaze unwavering, dissecting her performance. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat demanding silence. She knew he wasn't buying it immediately. Mark's intelligence was his most dangerous asset. He didn't deal in assumptions, only in proof. He was calculating the odds, weighing the anomaly. The I miss you message was out of character for their communication, but perfectly in character for a loving daughter missing her mother. The proximity of his name at the top of her contact list was a common technological mistake. It was a 60/40 chance, and Sarah needed him to land on the 40. He didn't move his arm from beneath her touch. The contact was confusing, blurring the line between comfort and accusation. Your mother? Mark finally echoed, the phrase hanging in the air like a poorly executed chord. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in rage, but in cold evaluation. You were texting, I miss you to your mother, and accidentally sent it to your husband who was sitting 3 feet away. He spoke slowly, listing the facts, forcing her to confront the awkwardness of the sequence. Why the sudden intense burst of emotion for your mother tonight, Sarah? I spoke to her on Tuesday. She sounded fine. A little bored, perhaps, but fine. Sarah gripped his arm tighter, channeling fear into urgent concern. Exactly. Bored. And lonely, Mark. She sounded lonely. We talked about her new neighbor, the one who keeps playing loud music late at night, and she sounded so upset, trying to manage it all by herself. It just hit me, how much she does for us, how far away she is, and I just felt this rush of guilt and worry. I just needed to tell her I was thinking of her. That's all. It was just a feeling, a fleeting moment of connection. You and I, we talk every day, we see each other. Of course I miss my mother more visibly. She's not here. She looked him directly in the eye, injecting a hint of defensiveness, the kind of protective instinct a daughter would have. Are you really questioning my feelings for my own mother, Mark? I think I deserve a little slack for being a concerned daughter. She had successfully shifted the focus from the suspicious message to his suspicious reaction. Mark was a man who hated conflict, especially emotional conflict. He hated being seen as insensitive. The accusation of questioning her maternal love was the perfect shield. He sighed, the tension in his shoulders easing fractionally. No, Sarah, I'm not questioning your feelings for your mother. I simply found the message unusual. We don't usually exchange those types of affectionate texts in the evening. He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly trying to rationalize the strange data point. The truth was ugly. A lie about motherly affection was merely confusing. Mark preferred confusion to disaster. Well, maybe we should, she said, leaning closer and softening her voice to a warm, intimate pitch. This was the moment to double down on the familial love, to overcompensate for the initial blunder. She slid her hand from his arm to his shoulder, beginning to massage the tense muscles. Maybe we've both gotten a little too predictable, huh? Just, did you pick up the dry cleaning? And the meeting went long. Maybe a little random. I miss you would do us both some good too. It's just, the thought slipped out. I was feeling affectionate. I'm sorry I accidentally sent my filial sentimentality to you. She gave him a small, genuinely regretful look, masking her internal terror with manufactured tenderness. Mark relaxed further under her touch. He knew the affair was a possibility. In a marriage as lukewarm as theirs, it always was. But he didn't want the evidence. He didn't want the messy, costly, life-shattering confrontation. Her explanation, while circumstantial, gave him the clean-out he subconsciously craved. It allowed him to retreat to the safety of the known, the manageable. He put his phone down, face up this time, dismissing the incident. It's all right, Sarah. Just a little confusing, that's all. You know I worry about you too. About stress, long day. Sarah quietly excused herself, claiming a headache and needing a glass of water. She didn't dare send the message to Liam while sitting next to Mark. Her hand was unsteady as she walked into the kitchen, the marble countertops and stainless steel appliances reflecting her anxious face. The air in the kitchen felt safer, more private. She opened the contact list again, her eyes scanning Mark's name, which still sat menacingly at the top. She scrolled down, agonizingly slowly, until she reached the L's. Liam. She typed the message again, her resolve renewed, the brush with disaster having amplified her desperate desire to connect with her lover. I miss you. That was close. Talk later. This time, she triple-checked the recipient's name before pressing send. The confirmation of delivery brought not relief, but a renewed sense of dread. The danger was gone, but the guilt remained, heavier than ever, compounded by the brazen lie she had just constructed. She took a long, cold drink of water, using the time to compose herself. She needed to be utterly convincing, entirely normal, when she returned. Mark might have accepted the explanation, but any sign of lingering distress or distraction would trigger his analytical mind again. She had to erase the event from her demeanor. The incident had created a fissure, a small crack in the foundation of their trust, and she knew Mark would, even subconsciously, be watching for further signs of structural damage. He would be searching for the pattern she had so artfully disrupted. When she returned to the living room, she found Mark exactly where she had left him, lost in the blue glow of his tablet. She didn't sit next to him. Instead, she chose the armchair opposite, pulling the cashmere throw tightly around her. I think I'll head up soon, she announced softly, trying to sound genuinely tired. It's been one of those days. Mark grunted in acknowledgement, not looking up. Okay. Good night, Sarah. His casual dismissal should have been comforting, proof that the crisis was over. Instead, it felt like an indictment. His focus on his work, his indifference, was precisely what had driven her into Liam's arms in the first place. The I miss you intended for Liam was a cry for validation and passion. Its accidental delivery to Mark was a terrifying moment of exposure, yet it still hadn't managed to fully capture his attention. The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth. The weekend arrived, bringing with it the pretense of normalcy and the promise of the visit to her mother. Mark, true to his word, had completed his merger draft and was ready to drive up Sunday afternoon. Sarah suggested they leave Saturday morning instead. Mom sounded a little down when I called her yesterday, Sarah pressed, using her mother's fabricated emotional state as leverage. I really think she needs more than just a quick drive-by. We should make a proper weekend of it. We can leave early, have dinner with her Saturday night, and come back Sunday evening. Mark hesitated, reviewing his internal schedule. I suppose I could move the golf game, he conceded, reluctantly. But you know I really needed that downtime. Fine, Saturday morning it is. But we're staying at a hotel near her place. I'm not sleeping on her uncomfortable guest bed. This unexpected shift in plans gave Sarah a momentary sense of triumph. She had pushed him into a timeline that suited her need for immediate damage control. The trip would serve as undeniable proof of her maternal devotion, further burying the accidental text message. She called Liam from her car the next morning while running a quick errand. She kept the conversation brief, her voice low and tight. "I'm going to my mother's this weekend. Mark is coming. No, you can't come up. It's too risky. This is strictly damage control." Liam's disappointment was palpable even through the static. "I need to see you. Now. Before we leave." Sarah knew it was reckless, but the risk of not seeing him, the risk of the emotional breakdown she felt brewing was greater. "I have about 40 minutes. Meet me at the usual spot, the coffee shop near the park entrance." 15 minutes. The clandestine meeting was fraught with tension. They didn't speak in their usual easy flow. They sat in the back booth, their hands clasped tightly under the table. The small, stolen intimacy, a stark contrast to the casual chatter of the other patrons. Sarah looked exhausted, her eyes shadowed. She quickly recounted the incident of the misdirected message, the quick-thinking lie, and Mark's subsequent, unsettling change in behavior. "He's watching me, Liam," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Not aggressively, but systematically. He's collecting data points. Everything is a test now. This whole weekend is a performance to prove I'm a good daughter, not an unfaithful wife." The drive to her mother's house was agonizingly long. Sarah tried to maintain a facade of engaged conversation, detailing her concerns about her mother's health and the difficulties with the new neighbor. Mark listened attentively, offering measured, practical suggestions for solutions, which was his standard response to emotional problems. His very presence, the casual way he drove and spoke, was a form of psychological torture. He was relaxed, which meant he was either entirely convinced or entirely confident in his ability to detect her next mistake. The arrival at her mother's house, however, provided the perfect backdrop for Sarah's performance. Her mother, Eleanor, was genuinely delighted to see them. Sarah rushed into her arms, an outpouring of affection that was only partly for Mark's benefit. Eleanor was the one person Sarah allowed herself to be truly vulnerable with, and the emotional rush of the reunion was a welcome shield. "Oh, Mark, look at her," Sarah exclaimed, holding her mother's hand tightly and turning to her husband. "She looks tired, doesn't she? I knew she wasn't telling me the whole truth on the phone." Eleanor, a charming woman who loved a bit of drama, immediately played along. "Oh, Sarah, I'm fine, darling. Just a little worn out with all the fuss. Mark, how lovely you could come. Now, come in, come in. I've baked your favorite pie." The evening was a success. Sarah spent the entire time fussing over her mother, fetching drinks, adjusting pillows, and listening intently to her complaints about the noisy neighbor. She allowed Mark to observe her care and affection, carefully laying the bricks of the new truth. The dinner conversation revolved entirely around Eleanor's well-being, their upcoming holiday plans together, and fond memories of Sarah's childhood, all topics cementing the strong mother-daughter bond. Every glance, every touch, every word Sarah directed towards Eleanor was a carefully placed piece of evidence, designed to retroactively justify the spontaneous, affectionate text message sent days earlier. Later that evening, back at the nearby hotel, the atmosphere between Sarah and Mark was strangely polite. The crisis had forced them into a proximity they hadn't shared in years, a transactional intimacy focused on a shared project. Eleanor's well-being, as they prepared for bed, Mark brought up the initial incident again, but this time with a definitive tone, as if confirming a hypothesis. "You know, seeing you with her tonight, Sarah, I get it now. You truly do worry about her. It makes sense that you'd send something impulsive like that." He paused, looking at her with a satisfied nod. "She's getting older. It's only natural. I apologize for questioning it." Sarah's breath caught. He was closing the case. The performance had worked. "Thank you, Mark," she said, her voice genuinely softened by relief. "It really did hurt that you thought I was being, I don't know, strange." She left the accusation vague, allowing him to fill in the blanks with whatever doubts he'd had, now supposedly dispelled. The next morning, however, the fragile peace was shattered. They were having breakfast with Eleanor, preparing to leave after a final round of goodbyes, when Eleanor mentioned something that froze Sarah's blood. "Oh, darling, speaking of text messages," Eleanor chirped brightly, sipping her tea. "Thank you so much for that sweet note you sent me the other night, Sarah. It really cheered me up." She smiled warmly. "The one you sent me on Friday night, right after you spoke to me. The one that said, 'I miss you too, Mom. Wish I could be there.' It was exactly what I needed to hear. Sarah stared at her mother, unable to speak. The room spun. Friday night. I miss you too, Mom. Eleanor had received a text. The real text Sarah had sent hours after the accidental one to Mark. The text she had sent to Liam but rerouted to her mother to complete the fabricated sequence. Sarah had panicked after the initial blunder, and in a moment of frantic covering, had quickly sent an affectionate text to her mother's phone to create a verifiable text thread that could be produced as proof if Mark demanded to see her phone. The real text she sent to her mother was supposed to read, "Love you, thinking of you." But in her haste and terror, she had made another, smaller, yet now equally catastrophic mistake. She had typed, "I miss you too, Mom. Wish I could be there." Mark's hand, reaching for the toast, froze midair. He slowly placed the slice of bread back on the plate. He turned his head, looking from Eleanor's innocent, beaming face to Sarah's pale, stricken one. His voice, when it came, was quiet, analytical, and utterly damning. "Wait," Mark said, his eyes drilling into Sarah. "Eleanor, you received a message that said, 'I miss you too, Mom,' on Friday night?" "But Sarah," he turned to his wife, his face a mask of cold calculation, "you sent me a message saying simply, 'I miss you' on Thursday evening. How could you miss your mother too on Friday when you hadn't missed her yet on Thursday?" The silence that followed Eleanor's innocent comment was vast and absolute. Sarah's internal world imploded. She hadn't accounted for the single, devastating word, too. It implied a preceding statement. If the Friday night text said, "I miss you too," and the Thursday night text to Mark was the first one, the chronology was completely wrong. The original message to Mark, "I miss you," could not have been for her mother, because her mother hadn't sent a message requiring a reciprocal too. The carefully constructed, multi-day performance of the devoted daughter dissolved instantly under the weight of one tiny adverb. Eleanor, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere, looked concerned. "Did I say something wrong?" she asked, her smile fading. "It was just a lovely, sweet text. I just mentioned it." Mark held up a hand, silencing Eleanor gently but firmly. His entire focus was now on Sarah, his analytical mind processing the incontrovertible facts. "The text you sent me Thursday said, 'I miss you,' singular, no context. No mom attached, which would be standard for you. You claimed it was an accidental send, intended for Eleanor, but Eleanor confirmed she received a message that contained 'to' on Friday night, implying a response to her previous message. Therefore, the Thursday text to me was not the initial expression of missing your mother. It was something else entirely." He leaned back in his chair, his expression remote. "Sarah, start over. Tell me who you meant to send 'I miss you' to on Thursday evening." Sarah's mind raced, searching desperately for a new, equally complex, and quick-witted lie. But Mark had boxed her in completely. The evidence was presented, analyzed, and the conclusion was inescapable. Any further fabrication would simply confirm her guilt. The time for clever maneuvers was over. She had to confess to the act of lying, but not the reason for the lie. Not yet. She let her head drop slightly, feigning shame and immense regret, avoiding eye contact with both her husband and her mother. It wasn't Eleanor. "Mark," she mumbled, her voice thick with manufactured guilt. "I'm so sorry. I was embarrassed. That's why I lied." Mark pressed her, his voice low and dangerous. "Embarrassed about what, Sarah? Who were you texting?" It was an old friend," she whispered, raising her eyes to meet his, trying to inject vulnerability and non-sexual harmlessness into her gaze. "From college, David. We hadn't spoken in years, and he reached out. We were catching up, and I told him how much I missed the good old days, the freedom, the fun we used to have." She took a shallow breath, weaving the new fabrication with feverish speed. "We exchanged a few messages, just reminiscing, and he texted me something like, 'Me too. Those were great times. I miss you.' And I replied, 'I miss you back. I'm sorry, I hit your name. It was childish. I was feeling nostalgic, a little sad, and I didn't want you to think I was unhappy or running around contacting old boyfriends. So I just said it was Mom. I'm sorry I lied, Mark. I was scared of your reaction." Eleanor watched the exchange, her hand covering her mouth in shock. "Sarah, why on earth would you lie to Mark about something so silly?" The silly factor was exactly what Sarah was banking on. It was a minor transgression, A momentary emotional lapse, far less damaging than infidelity. Mark considered this, his face still unreadable. An old college friend named David, he repeated, testing the phrase. A purely nostalgic exchange. Why the two then, Eleanor? Did David also send you a message on Friday? Sarah quickly jumped in, before Eleanor could be further confused. The Friday message to Mom was totally unrelated. I was so stressed after lying to you, Mark, that I actually called Mom to vent, and she cheered me up. That's why I sent her the, I miss you too, I meant. I miss you too now that I'm off the phone and feeling better. It was a simple message of affection after a good call. It had nothing to do with the David text. I was just so shaken by the incident. I confused my dates and my contacts. The second lie was convoluted, illogical, and riddled with emotional excuses. But it did two things. It provided a new, less catastrophic truth, nostalgic texting, not cheating, and it blamed the confusion on Sarah's own panicked emotional state. Mark despised emotional complications. He wanted clean data. Sarah had given him a new narrative that, while messy, was less damaging than the alternative. Mark stood up, pushing his chair back. He didn't look angry. He looked defeated. I need some air. He walked out of the room without another word, leaving Sarah and Eleanor alone. Eleanor immediately burst into concerned inquiries, but Sarah barely heard her. She knew this was only a temporary reprieve. Mark was not gone. He was simply outside, processing the new variables. The story of David would be easy to disprove, and Sarah knew she had just bought herself time, not salvation. She had thrown a smokescreen over the fire, and she had to figure out how to put out the embers before he returned. Sarah sat across from her mother, who was now tearfully dabbing her eyes with a napkin. Sarah, you have to talk to him. This is ridiculous. All this drama over a text to an old friend? Why didn't you just tell him the truth? I know, Mom, I know, Sarah murmured, maintaining the persona of the remorseful, oversensitive wife. It's just that Mark and things have been tense. I just didn't want him to think I was looking elsewhere. Even for friendship. I panicked. It was stupid. She glanced toward the window, watching Mark standing by his car, his back to the house, holding his phone to his ear. He was likely calling his office, or perhaps his lawyer. Or perhaps, Sarah's stomach dropped, he was finding out who David really was. She knew she couldn't let Mark investigate David, because David didn't exist. She needed to preempt his inevitable fact-checking. She needed to shift the emotional weight of the conversation one last time. She stood up abruptly. I need to talk to him, Mom. I'll be right back. She stepped out into the crisp autumn air. Mark was pacing slowly in the driveway, his phone still glued to his ear, his conversation low and tense. As she approached, he lowered the phone and hung up abruptly, his expression hard. I'm not talking to you right now, Sarah. You were calling your friend Ben, weren't you? Sarah said, cutting straight to the core of his behavior. Ben was Mark's close colleague and trusted confidant. You were going to ask him to do a background search on David or something, weren't you? Mark was taken aback by her directness. He paused, his guard momentarily dropped. I was trying to understand why you would lie about something so trivial. You've created an entire web of deceit over a nostalgic text message. Why, Sarah? What is wrong with our marriage that you feel the need to invent old flames? This was the opening she needed. She didn't deny the lie about David. She used the entire messy scenario as a weapon against him. It's not about David, Mark. It's about you. It's about us. Why do you think I felt the need to lie? Because our life is structured, predictable, and cold. I can't even send a silly, nostalgic text to a college friend without fearing your forensic analysis. You don't see me, Mark. You see a set of variables to be managed. The message wasn't the lie. The lie was my desperate attempt to protect a small, private, emotional corner of myself from your scrutiny. She allowed genuine tears of frustration to well up. She was crying over the real stress of her affair and the near miss, but Mark interpreted it as deep marital unhappiness. It was a perfect emotional misdirection. I missed feeling something, Mark. Anything, she continued, her voice breaking. The I miss you text, whether it was to an old friend or my mother, was a cry for affection, for connection. And when I sent it to you by mistake, I was terrified because I knew you wouldn't interpret it as love or affection for you. You would interpret it as a data error, an anomaly. And that's exactly what you did. She gestured back toward the house. You immediately went into investigator mode. You didn't ask if I was happy. You asked for proof. You turned this weekend into an interrogation. She stepped closer, placing her hands on his chest. I lied because I am desperately unhappy with how disconnected we are, Mark. I didn't want the text to become another project for you to manage. I wanted you to just respond. I miss you too, Sarah. But you didn't. You questioned the date and the recipient, and that tells me everything I need to know about us. Mark stood rigid, processing her accusation. This was not the financial market. This was his wife, attacking the very core of his personality, his analytical nature, and blaming his failure to respond emotionally for her behavior. For a man who prized logic and control, this emotional outburst was disarming. I see, he finally said, his voice softer, the investigative edge gone, replaced by confusion and guilt. I didn't realize you felt that way, Sarah. I thought we were fine. I thought the quiet was contentment. The quiet is silence, Mark, she said with crushing finality. And the silence is deafening. She stepped back, allowing the space between them to emphasize her point. I need you to stop playing investigator. I need you to trust me. The text was stupid. The lie was stupid. And I'm sorry for both. But if we can't move past this, then there's no hope for us. She had managed to flip the script entirely. The focus was no longer on her infidelity, or even her lie, but on his emotional failings as a husband. She had transformed the crisis from a wife cheats story into a husband is emotionally distant story. He was now on the defensive. He had to prove his capacity for emotional connection, or risk losing everything. He had been completely outmaneuvered. Mark stood silent for a long moment, the defeat settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. Sarah watched him, her own fear momentarily forgotten in the rush of tactical victory. She had played him, exploiting his aversion to emotional confrontation and his need to manage problems logically. By turning the spotlight onto his own behavior, she had effectively canceled out the need for him to investigate David or any other anomaly. The problem was no longer her text message. The problem was the marriage itself, a subject far too complex and painful for him to dissect in the middle of his mother-in-law's driveway. You're right, Mark admitted, his voice barely a whisper. The admission was a profound surrender for a man who always believed himself to be correct. I handled it badly. I went straight to the logistics, not the feeling. I apologize, Sarah. Truly. He ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly much older. I didn't mean to make you feel like you had to lie to me. I've been distracted, focused on work. I haven't been the husband you deserve. Sarah felt a sharp stab of authentic guilt. The man standing before her was broken, but not by the truth of her infidelity, only by the perception of his own emotional failure. He was taking the blame for a crime she had committed. She pressed her advantage, making her demands clear while appearing conciliatory. I forgive you, Mark, but we need to fix this. We need to talk, really talk, without judgment, and we need to start trusting each other again. That means no more private investigations, no more analyzing my phone or my odometer, okay? We either commit to fixing this with complete trust, or we don't. I agree, he said immediately, relieved to have a clear set of action items. He was back on firm ground. He had a plan, a commitment to a goal. He wasn't solving a crime. He was rebuilding a relationship. No more investigations, complete trust. We can start marriage counseling when we get back. I'll call a few places on Monday. He reached for her hand, and this time, the touch felt different. It was tentative, a request for reconciliation, not a forensic probe. Sarah squeezed his hand, the physical connection feeling deeply dishonest, yet completely necessary. She had succeeded. The lie of the nostalgic friend had been completely replaced by the bigger, messier truth of their unhappy marriage. The initial text was now irrelevant. It was just the catalyst for a much-needed, if entirely dishonest, marital intervention. They walked back into Eleanor's house, a picture of a couple united in their commitment to repair their bond. Eleanor, seeing their joined hands and Mark's chastened expression, beamed with relief. That's wonderful, darlings. Now, let's have a proper goodbye before you two head back to the city. The drive home was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was not the tense silence of accusation, but the measured quiet of two people who had agreed to a difficult, shared task. Mark was now focused on the future, on the logistics of finding a marriage counselor, on how to be more present and emotionally available. He was looking ahead, which meant he was no longer looking back at the text message. Sarah felt an immense, draining weariness. She had saved her secret, but at the cost of a deeper, more profound deception that now underpinned her entire life. She knew she couldn't stop seeing Liam. The affair was the symptom of the marriage's decay, and until the marriage genuinely changed, a prospect she found highly unlikely, she would need the escape, but she would have to be infinitely more careful. The near miss had taught her that. She had exhausted her supply of plausible lies and emotional misdirections. The next mistake would be fatal. That evening, tucked safely in her bed, with Mark quietly reading in the chair across the room, she sent a single, encoded text message to Liam, using the secure channel they had discussed at the coffee shop. Safe. Rebuilding structure. Cannot risk until foundation secure. Wait for my signal. The message was cryptic, professional, and entirely devoid of the affection that had almost ruined her life. She was no longer just a cheating wife. She was a strategist, managing her life as Mark managed his spreadsheets, balancing risk against reward, and hiding the truth in plain sight. The truth of the message was gone, but the consequence of the mistake was a terrifying new vigilance. The following weeks were a carefully orchestrated performance. Sarah and Mark began marriage counseling, which ironically became the perfect cover for her continued deception. The sessions provided a legitimate external reason for the heightened tension and deep, searching conversations they were now having. Mark threw himself into the process with the same methodical intensity he applied to a merger, reading self-help books and diligently practicing the communication exercises assigned by the therapist. He was genuinely trying, to bridge the emotional distance that Sarah had so cleverly used as her defense. Sarah, for her part, mastered the language of discontent. In therapy, she spoke about their lack of connection, his workaholism, and her need to feel valued and seen. Every word was true, but every word also served to reinforce the narrative she had created, that the "I miss you" text was merely an unconscious cry for help, a desperate act of emotional reaching, rather than a factual statement of longing for another man. The counselor, focused on marital dynamics, readily accepted this interpretation. Mark, eager to atone for his perceived failures, accepted it even more readily. During this period, Sarah maintained absolute radio silence with Liam. It was the longest they had gone without contact, and the separation was painful, a constant, dull ache beneath the surface of her new, busy life as a woman fixing her marriage. She focused on the logistics of the deception. She began using a burner phone, purchased far from home, and used only for communication with Liam. She created elaborate alibis for her absence, scheduling girls' nights that became late-night rendezvous in a rented apartment on the other side of the city. She learned to hide the stress, the guilt, and the excitement under a veneer of weary marital effort. Mark, satisfied that he was actively engaged in fixing the core problem, their emotional distance relaxed his surveillance. He believed the crisis was contained and managed. His focus was entirely on the future of their marriage, not the events of the past. The "I miss you" message was officially categorized and filed away as catalyst for marital intervention, no longer an unresolved data anomaly. One evening, 3 weeks after the disastrous visit to her mother, Sarah was reviewing her notes for the upcoming therapy session. Mark walked into the kitchen, a glass of water in his hand, looking thoughtful. "I called Eleanor today," he said casually, taking a sip. Sarah's muscles instantly tensed. "Oh? How is she?" "She's fine. She's decided to take your advice about the neighbor and write a formal letter of complaint." He paused, his gaze drifting to the window. "But that's not why I called. I called to apologize again. To tell her I regret that I allowed my analytical approach to turn our visit into such a painful, complicated argument. I told her I should have trusted you immediately." A wave of relief washed over Sarah, but it was quickly replaced by a sudden, icy surge of fear. Mark had a habit of over-apologizing when he felt he had genuinely wronged someone. This was his version of closing the loop, providing emotional clarity. "That was very thoughtful of you, Mark," Sarah said, keeping her tone warm and encouraging. He turned to face her, a small, genuine smile on his face. She was lovely about it. She said she understood that people get stressed, and she thanked me for the text. Sarah frowned. "The text? I thought you called her?" "No, I mean the text I sent her after we talked this morning," Mark clarified. "I was on my way to work, and I just sent her a quick message to check in and apologize for the misunderstanding again. I thought it would make her feel better." Sarah's breath hitched again. This was innocent, normal behavior, but Mark's adherence to his own logic always had a hidden consequence. "And what did you say?" Mark shrugged, utterly unaware of the danger. "I just said something short, something heartfelt. I wanted to show her I had learned my lesson about emotional communication. I think I just wrote, 'Eleanor, I truly appreciate your understanding today. I miss you.'" Sarah's mind went blank. Mark sent the message, "I miss you," to Eleanor. The precise, exact three-word message that had started the entire catastrophic deception. You sent "I miss you" to Mom?" Sarah asked, her voice high and strained, masking the shock. Mark nodded, pleased with himself. "Yes. I figured if you could send it to her, I could too. It felt liberating, actually. I'm trying to be more spontaneous." He was trying to prove he was a better husband, completely unaware that his simple act of affection had now created a chilling, perfect alibi for the man he was supposed to be. Mark had just established a new, verifiable pattern of behavior in his own communication. If, in the future, Sarah were ever caught sending "I miss you" to someone else and needed to deflect, Mark's own text to her mother would serve as a shining, unassailable example of affectionate texting to in-law, making any similar future text from Sarah seem perfectly plausible. He hadn't just closed the case, he had provided the key to the next lock. Sarah stared at Mark, a profound sense of horror and perverse relief washing over her. The irony was so immense, so brutally poetic, it almost made her laugh. Mark, the investigator, had inadvertently provided the perfect defense for the ongoing crime. By sending an affectionate, unprompted "I miss you" to his mother-in-law, he had established that such an action was now within the bounds of normal communication within their family circle. The door to future, less believable lies had just been kicked wide open by the man who was supposed to be guarding it. "That's very sweet of you, Mark," Sarah managed to say, forcing a soft smile. "I'm sure she appreciated the sentiment. It shows how much you're trying to change." She walked over and gave him a light, appreciative kiss on the cheek, a gesture of gratitude for his unwitting gift. The conversation ended there, but the implications settled heavily on Sarah. She now lived in a marriage where trust had been restored through a spectacular lie, and where her husband's attempt at emotional redemption had given her carte blanche for future deceit. She had not only survived the first mistake, but she had weaponized the consequences, using her husband's virtues, his commitment to fixing a problem, his need to apologize as the tools for her own continued betrayal. The months that followed saw a strange, fragile peace settle over the house. Mark continued his self-improvement. The marriage counseling provided a useful framework for their interactions, and Sarah continued her affair with Liam, now with a terrifying confidence born of successful evasion. The burner phone was kept hidden, the excuses were airtight, and the risks were calculated with ruthless precision. She had learned that the biggest secrets were best hidden not in darkness, but in overwhelming, manufactured light. The light of a devoted wife working hard to save her marriage. The original misdirected message, the three simple words that nearly destroyed her life, had become a footnote, a small, painful catalyst for a profound, permanent change. It had taught Sarah that her husband was more afraid of emotional failure than he was of infidelity, and that his greatest weakness was his desperate need for things to make logical, manageable sense. And she had provided him with a fully reasoned, emotional explanation that he couldn't resist. One afternoon, sitting alone in her car, parked blocks away from her next rendezvous with Liam, Sarah scrolled through her contacts. She paused on Mark's name. The memory of the moment the text delivered to his phone still sent a shiver down her spine. But now it was a memory of triumph, not terror. She opened the burner phone, navigated to Liam's contact, and typed her message. It was short, a simple confirmation of her arrival. Before locking the phone and tucking it away, she thought about the power of three small words and how they had managed to save her life and destroy her marriage all at once. She was free to continue her lie, but she was trapped forever in the intricate cage of her own making. The irony was that the marriage was, in many ways, better now, more communicative, more affectionate, all built on the foundation of a deception that had almost killed it. The deeper she and Mark worked to save the marriage, the safer her secret became. The end of the story was not a revelation, but a sustained, perfected act of profound, quiet dishonesty. And as you reflect on Sarah's incredible, ruthless survival, the audacity of her lies, and the chilling competence of her strategy, you have to wonder, how many perfect marriages are just perfect lies? How many partners sitting across the dinner table are carrying a secret so profound, so well hidden, that one accidental keystroke could shatter everything? Think about that the next time your phone vibrates. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the psychology of deceit and the fragile boundaries of trust, please consider hitting the subscribe button and ringing the notification bell. It helps the channel bring you more gripping true crime stories and complex human dramas just like this one. What other marital mysteries would you like us to explore next? Let me know in the comments below.